Part two of the Shoe Still Life project is all about designing a composition. So let's take this opportunity to quickly go through what that involves. And let's focus on space, shape, and in particular, positive and negative shape. First of all, when we're talking about two-dimensional art, we recognize the format, which is the box that our composition is designed in. Now, what is composition? Basically, composition involves all the visual elements and the process of arranging them inside that box, inside that format. Visual elements include things like the actual images, but also textures and colors, values, shapes, lines, all those things that we make art with. And so the designer or the artist has to make choices about like where those visual elements go inside the box. Let's look at some examples. The drawing on the left is, I'm calling it a spot illustration, meaning it's just a drawing of a dog in the middle of a piece of paper. Let's pretend that that box is actually the edge of the sketchbook paper. Compare that to the composition on the right, or the artwork on the right. I call that artwork an actual composition because we see that there's more visual elements than just the dog. Like there's the grass and there's the shadow on the grass. And the artist has made choices in terms of like, okay, I want the dog's ears to go that close to the edge of the format, or I want the shadow to extend right off the format, or I want the grass to come up about like 1/3 up vertically the format. Here's another example. So really great painting of a dog on the left, but wouldn't call that a composition. It's just a dog, boom, in the middle of a piece of paper. The dog on the right, though, is a part of a composition. There's other visual elements inside the composition. The money bills flying through the air, the edge of the racetrack, the grass. And we know that decisions have been made about how big that dog is within that format, or how many bills are flying through the air, and the fact that the one on the far left extends right off the format. So those kinds of design decisions were made. That's part of the design process. Now, as soon as we place a shape in the format, in the box, more shapes are created around the shape. So here the gray shape is the main shape, but then all the white space around that gray shape is also considered part of the artwork. And this slide shows that especially when the main shape is extended right off the format, those other shapes, so in this case the white shapes, are more obvious. We can actually see them as shapes. It's not just like a bunch of space. So you need to consider that part of the artwork as being just as important as the main imagery. Now, here's some special art terms: positive and negative shape. Positive shape would be the main visual element, the main image in a piece of art, piece of two-dimensional art. The negative shape would be all the other shapes left over. So in this example, we have one positive shape, and then we have 8 chunks of negative shape, 8 white spaces left over. Here's another example. One positive shape, that's the dancer, and that includes the fan that she's holding, because she's holding it so our eye or our brain perceives that fan as a part of her. It's all one shape. But then we have 5 negative shapes surrounding her. And those 5 negative shapes are there because of the woman's body positioning and her shape, but also because of how she interacts with the format or the edge of the composition. So in other words, her right arm extends off the edge of the composition, thereby dividing negative shape 1 from negative shape 2. And in this case, we see similar things happening, like for instance, just the way the skier's legs are positioned, and skis actually. Look at negative shape 8 and notice how it's separated from negative shape 7. So in this case, we have one positive shape and 5 negative shapes. Here, one positive shape and several negative shapes. But what I really want you to notice is that in this case, the artist has made the far left negative shape 2 different colors, thereby creating what you can think of as sub-shapes. So that's all one big piece of negative shape, but it's almost like we have negative shape 1 and negative shape 1a, like a sub-shape. So that's one way that the artist has created a little bit more visual complexity in the artwork, breaking large negative shapes into shapes within shapes. One more example, one positive shape, 9 negative shapes. The positive shape is Paganini, the violin player, and that includes his violin and his bow because it's all connected. Now, what if a composition, though, has more than one positive shape? Like in this case, there's 3 koi fish. Well, what artists do then is they link all the positive shapes together because our brain likes that. Our human brain looks for simplicity and looks for a natural connection amongst imagery in a composition. And so when we look at this painting, our brain actually perceives those 3 women and their crates as one big shape. And so this artist strategically overlapped all those women or their crates to make them all touching. So we call that a figure. We say that that's a singular figure. So here there's 2 men and a boat. So that's like technically 3 different visual elements, but they've all been strategically overlapped. They're all touching, and that makes a figure. This is a very interesting painting. And what I'm suggesting here is that all the lily pads are connected, and they're all connected to the man, making one big overall shape called the figure. Now, another important art term is ground, and ground is just another name for negative shape. So you can see that all those lily pads, the flowers, and the man are the figure in this case. That's the positive shape. And then what's left over is the negative shape, or we call it the ground. And so figure ground depends on how the positive shape is grouped. And so here's 3 different compositions showing 3 different groupings of, the same horses. So how the positive shape is grouped matters. It determines the negative shape, but also how the positive shape interacts with the edge of the format matters. Compare the 3rd composition on the far right to the one on the far left. The negative shape is different. And it's because the horses in the far right composition extend right off the format. So those are design decisions that artists have to make. And here's an example from a student. We see it's just basically what's going on here is it's just a different crop, right? It's like we've zoomed in to the composition on the far right version. Actually, what's going on here is if you look from left to right, we're zooming in more and more and more. So that's why you should always design compositions in a box. Don't treat the edge of your sketchbook paper as the edge of the format. You need to establish the format, establish the specific shape of the format, and think about how the positive shape is going to interact with the shape of the format. Here's a really nice piece of art. What if I show it to you in this version? There's just sort of the line drawing of it. And how about if we look at it in this version now, where I've differentiated the figure or the positive shape from the ground or the negative shape. I've shaded the ground in so that you can see the positive, negative shape. So in other words, this artist used some really great design techniques and strategically grouped all of the positive shapes. All of the women and their candles are touching to make one overall figure. This creates a lot of connectedness, wholeness, a lot of unity in a piece of art. Here's another example. All the fish are touching, making a figure, and what's left over are individual chunks of negative shape that make up what we call the ground. That's it. Now, let's look at this in relation to the Shoe Still Life project that we're working on. You have done step number 1, That's this. You take a photo, and remember that there are specific guidelines for the photo in terms of how you set up the shoes and the lighting. Then you email that photo to me, Mr. Marchenko. Then I do step 2. And what I'm going to do in step 2 is this. I am going to reduce the amount of negative shape by cropping. So here's my photo example, and I'm thinking that if I was to crop it into the yellow box, that would create a better sense of positive negative shape. There's the end result. I like that better. Look at this version. Now you can really see the positive shape is the shoes, and they're like a figure, right? Because there's 2 of them, but they're strategically grouped to make one overall figure. And then the pink space left over is the ground or the negative shape. I turned it pink just so you could really see what I mean about positive negative shape. So we've gone from that photo to a crop, which has a reduction of negative shape. We want the positive shape to dominate the composition. So I'm going to do this step for you. I'm going to put the photo that you send me in Photoshop and just use the crop tool. Here's an example. Here's a great photo that I received. So I grab the crop tool and I start thinking about reducing the negative shape. I want the positive shape, which are the boots, to dominate the composition. I want to maintain some of the shadow though, because I love the way that the shadow makes a shape itself. There we go. And then I might even experiment perhaps with, I'll zoom in a little bit for you. What if I was to reduce the top even more? Have some of that positive shape extend right off the composition, because I like how it then breaks up the negative shape. And I can go back and forth if I'm not sure about that. Okay, so that's what I will be doing for you. And then I'm going to send this back to you so that you can work on step 3. So that's just a little bit about design, positive, negative shape, and you're going to apply this concept to all the artwork that you make. So like it says here, design well and have fun making art.